She was a respected state prosecutor, sharp, composed, and unshakable in the courtroom. But in a matter of minutes, Mariana Caldwell became a suspect in her own story, handcuffed beside her own car, accused of stealing what already belonged to her. Why? Because she was black. What followed was a harrowing descent into the very system she once upheld, a system that chose assumption over truth and silence over accountability. But Mariana wouldn't stay silent. What began as a wrongful arrest ignited a citywide reckoning, one that would expose buried corruption, topple careers, and spark a revolution. This is how it began. Before we dive into this shocking mystery, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you love thrilling, jaw-dropping stories, don't forget to subscribe. The late afternoon sun bled across the courthouse steps, casting long shadows that danced across the asphalt as Mariana Caldwell pulled into the far end of the staff parking lot. Her silver sedan, a sleek electric model she'd just picked up last month, hummed to a halt in a reserved spot near the security cameras. She was exhausted but composed as always. Another long day in court, another high-profile case in the books. Her heels clicked purposefully against the pavement as she opened the driver's door and leaned inside, brushing back a strand of dark hair that had slipped from her bun. Her face was sharp with focus, brows drawn as she muttered under her breath, "Where are you, damn it?" She rifled through the glove box, then under the seats, her movements quick and urgent. Her charger was missing, and with her phone dead and her wallet buried somewhere in the mess of folders, receipts, and case notes from a chaotic week, she had no way to call for help or even verify who she was. Still, she wasn't worried. Not yet. A pair of footsteps echoed in the distance, crunching slowly against the gravel of the far entrance. Mariana didn't look up at first. She assumed it was courthouse staff or a janitor on an early shift. But the footsteps stopped. She felt it before she saw it. That stillness, that weight that settles in the air when something shifts, something watching. Her spine prickled with instinct as she straightened halfway, glancing over her shoulder. A black and white cruiser had glided into the lot like a shark through still water. It now idled 20 feet away, its engine purring. Behind the wheel sat Officer Nathan, a man whose expression held no curiosity, only presumption. His sunglasses caught the late-day sun as he stared at her, unmoving. Mariana's hand paused inside the car. Her breath caught. Her blazer felt suddenly too tight around her ribs. She turned back to the car, trying to act casual, though the dread in her stomach tightened like a vice. Keep calm. Keep composed. The cruiser door creaked open. The sound sliced through the quiet like a warning shot. Heavy boots crunched closer. Her heartbeat rose, not out of fear, but from memory, from history. She had seen this happen too many times to others. She had prosecuted cases involving cops like this. She knew exactly how fast this could spiral. "Hey!" a voice barked, sharp, authoritative, accusatory, not inquisitive, not concerned, just hostile. Mariana stood up slowly, straightening her blazer. The setting sun painted sweat onto her temple as she turned to face him. Nathan approached, hand resting deliberately on his belt, just inches from his holster. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, voice flat but laced with suspicion. "I'm looking for my phone charger. My phone's dead," Mariana said calmly, gesturing toward the open door. "This is my car." Nathan's eyes narrowed. He didn't glance at the car, didn't ask for proof, didn't check the plates. He didn't need to, not in his mind. A black woman in a luxury car, rummaging through the front seat in a half-empty lot after hours, that was enough. "You got ID on you?" he asked, already knowing her answer wouldn't satisfy him. No, Mariana said carefully. "It's in my bag, which I'm trying to find. Look, officer, Step away from the vehicle." Her stomach dropped. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a charge forming in the air, a storm gathering behind his badge. As her fingers rose slowly in surrender, a flicker of her own defiance sparked in her chest. He didn't know who she was, but soon he would. Officer Nathan didn't blink. His stance stiffened as he took another step forward, the sun casting his shadow long and ominous across the pavement toward Mariana. His hand hovered just a little closer to his holster now, not resting but preparing. He didn't ask for the vehicle's registration, didn't inspect the parking permit clearly hanging from the rearview mirror marked with a courthouse seal. He didn't need to. In his mind, the scene had already been decided. Black woman, expensive car, looking nervous, in a government lot. It checked all the boxes. He'd made his judgment. Now he just needed to act on it. I said, "Step away from the vehicle," Nathan repeated, sharper this time. Mariana exhaled slowly, her spine straightening. Her hands rose a little higher, not out of fear, but caution, a gesture she knew too well. "Officer, I already told you," she said, her voice firm but composed. "This is my car. I am the owner. My name is Mariana Caldwell. I'm the state prosecutor assigned to this district. My ID and badge are in my bag, which I'm trying to find, because my phone died and I have no way to contact my office." Nathan's lip curled, not with amusement, but with disbelief. His eyes scanned her sharply, as if the words coming from her mouth were too absurd to even entertain. "State prosecutor?" he echoed, letting the words hang heavy in the air. Then he smirked, a crooked thing full of condescension. "Right. And I'm the mayor." Mariana didn't flinch. Her silence was cutting. The air between them grew thicker. The space weighted with everything he refused to see and everything she refused to surrender. "I'm not going to argue with you," she said, stepping slowly away from the car, her palms still visible. "Just check the plates. Check the VIN. Call the courthouse. I'm listed in the directory. My name is on the door 5 floors up." But Nathan wasn't interested in facts. Facts complicated stories. Facts required the kind of patience he didn't care to exercise, especially not for someone like her. "People like you always got a story," he muttered, pulling out his radio. "Always think if you talk enough, it'll sound real." Behind his sunglasses, his eyes were calculating. There was no empathy there, no professional curiosity. Just a narrative, written, rehearsed, and now ready for execution. "I'm going to need you to turn around," he said flatly. Mariana's heart clenched. "Are you serious?" "You're being detained on suspicion of attempted vehicle theft." A moment of pure raw disbelief flashed in her eyes, but it passed quickly, replaced by something colder, deeper. She gave a short, almost bitter laugh. "You didn't even check the plates!" Nathan stepped forward, voice low and menacing. "Turn around." And just like that, the law was weaponized. Not to serve, not to protect, but to control, to humiliate, to punish. She wasn't a woman anymore. She wasn't a prosecutor. She was a threat. A suspect in his eyes, guilty until proven innocent, and even then not quite. As Mariana slowly turned, her wrists offered forward, her mind wasn't on the cuffs. It was on the courtroom. Because this man had no idea who he'd just laid hands on, and no idea what was coming. The cold bite of the handcuffs snapped around Mariana's wrists like a cruel punctuation mark, final, unnecessary, and humiliating. Officer Nathan didn't even flinch as he yanked her arms behind her back with deliberate force, his grip rough and dismissive, as if she were some nameless criminal pulled off the street. "You've got the right to remain silent," he muttered, not even bothering to make eye contact. The words dripped from his mouth like a formality, not a protection. Mariana winced as metal met bone. Her blazer bunched at the elbows. Her body bent awkwardly under the pressure of the moment. She didn't resist, she couldn't, but her mind raced, burning. She had stood before juries, debated constitutional law, cross-examined killers, and yet here she was, reduced to a silhouette in cuffs, held by someone who saw her skin before he saw her humanity. He shoved her toward the cruiser, her heels scraping awkwardly against the pavement. A few courthouse clerks passed in the distance, one slowing at the sight, eyes wide, uncertain. But no one intervened. No one questioned the scene. It was easier that way. People didn't like getting involved, especially when the person in cuffs looked like her. "Officer Nathan," Mariana began, her voice strained but steady. "I'm giving you one last chance to verify who I am. You're making a serious mistake." Nathan scoffed as he opened the rear door of the cruiser. "You're right," he said. "The mistake was thinking you'd just walk away." He shoved her inside. The door slammed shut like the end of a sentence she hadn't been allowed to finish. She sat in the back seat, twisted and tense, her wrists already beginning to ache. Through the window, she watched Nathan circle her car again, peering in like a predator staking out prey. He radioed something in, his voice low, casual. He wasn't flustered, he was enjoying this. That much was clear. The cruiser stank of stale coffee and cheap vinyl. The cage separating the front seat from the back made Mariana feel like she was in a documentary about people she'd once defended, but now she was the headline. Minutes passed. She leaned her head back, tried to calm the boiling storm beneath her skin. Her name, her credentials, her truth. None of it mattered here. Not to a man who had made up his mind the moment he saw her bending into her own car. The driver's door opened. Nathan slid in without looking at her. He checked the mirror. "Still nothing on you," he said, as if she'd lied about being a human being. "Guess that means we're going for a ride." "You could have just run the plates," Mariana said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut steel. Nathan glanced at her in the mirror. His smirk returned. "Lady, I don't need to check anything to know what's going on." "You're right," she said, meeting his eyes in the reflection. "Because you already decided who I was the moment you saw me." He didn't respond. She turned her gaze to the side window as the cruiser pulled out of the lot and the courthouse faded into the distance. The walls of justice were behind her now, and ahead the ugly truth of a system she thought she knew. This wasn't just an arrest. This was a reckoning. And Officer Nathan had just stepped into something far bigger than he could imagine. The holding cell was cold, metallic, and soaked in silence. The kind that crawled under your skin and whispered that you didn't belong, not because you were innocent, but because you were invisible. Mariana Caldwell sat rigid on a hard plastic bench, her wrists sore, her dignity cracked but not broken. The steel door clanged shut behind her, a final insult in a string of humiliations. Her blazer, once crisp and professional, was wrinkled. Her hair, always neatly pulled back, now clung to her damp forehead. But the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. Not yet. Across the hall, through a small glass window, Officer Nathan leaned casually on a desk, sipping from a stained coffee mug, laughing with another officer. They weren't in a rush. They weren't worried. And that was the horror of it. They didn't care who she was. Not really. She could be a mother, a teacher, the mayor herself. But right now, to them, she was just another suspect, another black woman in cuffs. Her name, her title, her years of work fighting for justice in the same courthouse they all pretended to serve. None of it mattered. She stood pressing her hands against the cold wall, trying to focus, think, breathe. She had tried to reason with them. At every step she told the truth. Check the plates. Call the courthouse. Look up my name. But Nathan had ignored it all. The younger officer, the one who had hesitated briefly at her arrest, had looked at her with uncertainty but not enough to speak up. Fear kept everyone in line, and she could feel the suffocating weight of it now, like a collar being tightened around her throat. A door opened. She straightened, hoping, praying, that someone with sense had finally arrived. But it was another uniform. A tall white officer with an indifferent stare who approached the cell with a clipboard. "Caldwell?" he asked flatly. She stepped forward. "That's me." He didn't meet her eyes. "No ID. No record of this vehicle being registered under your name. Nothing that matches your story." "My ID is in the purse I told Officer Nathan to retrieve. The car is registered to my name and the state," she said. Voice clipped, but controlled. "Check the records. Call Chief Monica Jackson if you don't believe me." The officer raised an eyebrow at her mention of the chief, then chuckled under his breath. "Right, and I'm the governor." He turned away. That was the moment Mariana felt something shift, not in them, but in herself. Not just rage, not just humiliation, but a deep choking disbelief that this system she had once believed she could navigate, this system she had fought to uphold, was now swallowing her whole. She sank back onto the bench, her back straight, her eyes burning into the floor. This wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. A conscious choice to ignore the facts, to disregard her, to strip her of identity until she was just another body in the system. The horror wasn't that she was arrested. The horror was that it was this easy. And if it could happen to her, how many others had already been forgotten? The station buzzed with casual conversation and the muted hum of paperwork, phones ringing and boots echoing on tile, business as usual. But inside Mariana Caldwell's holding cell, time had stalled. Minutes dragged into an hour, then 2. She remained seated, hands now freed, but stiff, her back ramrod straight, her face unreadable. Her name had weight, her title carried power, but none of that had pierced the thick veil of indifference that shrouded the precinct. Every time a uniformed officer passed her door, they glanced in with passing curiosity, but no one stopped, no one asked questions, no one looked too closely, because the moment they did, they'd have to confront what they'd already chosen to ignore. Across the station, Officer Nathan lounged near the records desk, spinning the story of Mariana's arrest to anyone who'd listen. "Claimed she's the state prosecutor," he said with a chuckle. but can't even produce ID. No phone, no purse. Just found her leaning into a luxury sedan in a government lot. Looked real suspicious. The officers around him nodded, laughed, shrugged. No one questioned the logic. No one asked about verification. One even muttered, "She's lucky that's all that happened." And with that, Mariana became the punchline of a story no one cared to fact-check. But outside the station, the truth was waiting to be seen. The courthouse parking lot, where it all began, was under full surveillance. High-resolution cameras mounted on the perimeter recorded every inch of activity 24/7. Footage that could show Mariana unlocking her own car with a fob. Footage that could show her parked in a clearly marked state prosecutor's space. Footage that would demolish Nathan's claims of suspicious behavior. But when one of the newer officers quietly brought up the idea of reviewing the surveillance, Nathan waved it off. "I checked the report. The camera on that side's been down since last week," he said without flinching. "Besides, I trust what I saw." It wasn't true, and he knew it. Meanwhile, the body cam footage from the arrest mysteriously glitched, cutting out shortly before Nathan placed Mariana in cuffs. A technical error, the station's tech supervisor claimed with a shrug. No urgency to investigate. No interest in preserving the chain of evidence. It was easier to let the story stand. Easier to bury the footage than to admit the mistake. Inside her cell, Mariana felt the silence closing in around her like a noose. It wasn't the shouting, the brutality, or the slurs she had prepared herself for in the worst-case scenario. It was the absence of decency, the collusion in quiet. She had fought corruption in courtrooms across the state, yet nothing felt more dangerous than the casual dismissal of truth by those sworn to uphold it. Somewhere, beyond these walls, her name was being spoken, her missed calls piling up. James Keller would be looking for her. Her staff would wonder where she went. But would it be fast enough? Would the truth matter before the lie calcified into something permanent? She looked toward the narrow window, sunlight now faded into dusk. Still no phone call, still no chief, still no acknowledgement of who she was. And with each passing hour, the line between her reality and the system's fabrication thinned. Everyone saw, no one acted. The cameras, the officers, the paperwork, all bore witness. But the real crime wasn't what they did. It was what they chose not to do. The clock above the courthouse lobby blinked 7:42 p.m. when James Keller slammed his briefcase shut and stood up from the conference room table, tension crackling beneath his calm exterior. He had left Mariana 3 voicemails, sent 4 unanswered texts. She wasn't late. She was missing. And that, more than anything, made his gut twist into knots. Mariana Caldwell was meticulous, a creature of schedule and principle. If she didn't show up, something was wrong, very wrong. His breath was tight as he strode out of the courthouse, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios, none of which prepared him for what he was about to discover. 15 minutes later, James walked into the front entrance of Central Precinct, his crisp navy suit setting him apart from the officers milling behind the glass. He approached the front desk with the kind of quiet confidence that made people pause, not because he was loud, but because he commanded presence. The young desk officer glanced up at him, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I'm looking for Mariana Caldwell," James said. "She hasn't been seen or heard from since this afternoon, and her car was last spotted in the courthouse lot." The officer hesitated. "Do you have a relation to Miss Caldwell?" "I'm her legal counsel," he replied, flashing his bar card. "And if she's in this building, I suggest you take me to her immediately. Otherwise, I'll assume you're holding a state prosecutor without notifying legal representation, which, as you're aware, is both unethical and illegal." That got the attention of someone deeper inside. Officer Nathan stepped into the hallway just as the desk officer rose to make a call. His eyes landed on James, and immediately his jaw tightened. He knew the name, knew the face, knew that this was trouble. "Can I help you?" Nathan asked, arms crossed, voice smooth as oil, but just as slick. "I'm here for Mariana Caldwell," James said, eyes locking onto Nathan's like a blade meeting steel. "I believe you're the arresting officer. Perhaps you can explain what crime you believe she committed." Nathan smirked but said nothing. James stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You had better be damn sure you know what you've done, officer. Because if you've detained the state prosecutor without cause, I promise you, this entire building will feel the consequences." There was a flicker in Nathan's expression, a crack in the smirk. He motioned toward a door down the hall. "She's in holding, and it said she was someone important. We were still verifying her identity." James's stare hardened. "She's not someone important. She is the prosecutor for this district. You didn't verify anything, you assumed. And now you've got a civil rights lawsuit brewing in the next 5 minutes if I don't see her now." Nathan said nothing, but the silence spoke louder than denial. It was the silence of guilt. James followed the escort officer down the hallway, his pace measured, every step driven by fury he refused to show. When the door to the holding area finally opened, he saw her, Mariana, sitting calmly on the bench, still dignified, but the steel in her eyes sharpened when she looked up. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Her expression said it all. They thought they could break me. They were wrong. James stepped inside, gently took her by the arm, and turned to the officers. "This ends now," he said, "and when I'm done, you won't be able to hide behind your badges." The air in the precinct had shifted. Subtly at first, like the scent of ozone before a storm, but now it was impossible to ignore. Whispers flitted through the hallways, clipped and urgent. "She's really the prosecutor? How could they not know? Did you see the footage?" Officer Nathan was no longer smirking. His once casual swagger had stiffened into something defensive, brittle. In the main office, a junior officer approached his supervisor, holding a file with trembling fingers. "Sir, I ran the plates. The vehicle's registered to the state attorney's office under Mariana Caldwell." The supervisor took it with a grunt, not even bothering to make eye contact. A beat passed, then 2. The young officer waited. "Should we—" "We'll handle it," the supervisor cut in, voice like a blade. "You can go." Meanwhile, Mariana sat in the processing room, back straight, hands folded, her expression unreadable, but her silence screamed louder than any protest. James Keller stood beside her, arms crossed, his jaw tight as he watched the officers try to compose themselves as if pretending nothing had happened would somehow erase the last 4 hours of humiliation, detention, and the sheer weight of disrespect. It didn't. A sergeant entered the room moments later, a stack of paperwork in hand and sweat glistening beneath his collar. "Miss Caldwell," he began, the words struggling to escape his mouth, "we've verified your identity. It appears there's been a misunderstanding." James cut in before Mariana could respond. "Misunderstanding implies this was an honest mistake. But this wasn't that. This was profiling, disregard, abuse of power." His voice remained low, but each word struck like a gavel. "You had every tool at your disposal to confirm who she was. Instead, your officer chose to believe his own assumptions over a black woman's truth." The sergeant's lips tightened. "We're looking into the situation. Officer Nathan acted on what he believed." "What he believed?" Mariana finally spoke, her voice sharp and calm, like glass under pressure. "He believed I didn't belong because I was black. He believed I was stealing my own car because I didn't look like someone who drove one. And he believed he could put me in cuffs without consequence because that's what this department has trained him to believe." A long silence followed. The sergeant cleared his throat. "You're free to go now." "That's it?" James asked, incredulous. "No written statement, no explanation, no apology." The sergeant shifted. "We're still reviewing the internal protocol." James stepped forward. "Don't insult us. You're not reviewing anything. You're stalling, hoping this goes away before it explodes." Mariana stood slowly, her eyes never leaving the sergeant's. "Let me be clear," she said, each word crisp with fury barely contained. "You don't get to quietly walk this back now. You arrested the state prosecutor of this district on fabricated suspicion. You ignored basic verification, withheld a phone call, and let your officer humiliate me while others stood by. I'm not just walking out of here. I'm walking out with everything I need to burn your silence to the ground." The sergeant opened his mouth to respond, but there was nothing left to say. The room had already shifted in Mariana's favor. They could no longer deny who she was, but they still couldn't accept what they had done. And that was the real problem. By sunrise the next morning, Mariana Caldwell's name was on every local news ticker, but not for the reasons she had spent her career earning. Grainy cell phone footage of her being shoved into the back of a police cruiser, her hands cuffed, her voice calm but sharp, had already gone viral. The caption beneath the clip read, "State prosecutor arrested outside her own courthouse." Social media erupted in fury. Civil rights attorneys, local activists, and community organizers reposted the footage with hashtags like "Starks arrested while black" and "Ichirust D told you who she was." The video was only 36 seconds long, but it was enough. Enough to ignite the fire, enough to strip away any illusion that what had happened was a mere oversight. It was a portrait of power abused, identity erased, and truth ignored, all in the span of half a minute. Inside the walls of the precinct, the tone had changed. The casual arrogance of the day before had twisted into a simmering panic cloaked in protocol. Internal Affairs had received over 200 complaints overnight. Phone lines lit up. Reporters camped outside the building. But even in the chaos, no one had issued a statement. Silence had become their last defense. Mariana, meanwhile, was back in her home office, her hands no longer cuffed, but still marked by the bruises of that night. She stood before a bank of windows, dressed in a tailored black blazer, her expression composed, but volcanic beneath the surface. James Keller sat across from her, holding a press release draft, but his eyes were on her face. "We can move forward whenever you're ready," he said softly. "The press is waiting downstairs, and the department still hasn't responded." Mariana didn't speak immediately. Her gaze lingered outside, over the city she had fought to protect, the courtroom she had honored, and the system that had betrayed her in broad daylight. When she finally turned around, her voice was low but unshakable. "I don't want a statement. I want a reckoning." James nodded once. He knew better than to offer reassurance. She didn't need comfort. She needed a microphone. Within the hour, Mariana stepped up to the podium, flanked by James and two prominent civil rights leaders. Dozens of reporters leaned forward. The air vibrated with urgency. Flashbulbs popped. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "My name is Mariana Caldwell. I am the state prosecutor for this district. And 2 nights ago I was racially profiled, wrongfully detained, denied a phone call, and humiliated by a department that's supposed to uphold the law." A ripple moved through the crowd. Her words didn't waver. This wasn't an honest mistake. This was a conscious choice to disregard the truth in favor of a dangerous assumption, one that could have ended differently if I wasn't trained to navigate it. But I shouldn't have to be trained to survive a traffic stop, or an arrest, or a routine day in my own parking lot. No one should. Behind the cameras, officers watched from screens, tension mounting. At the precinct, Officer Nathan sat at his desk like a man waiting for the hammer to fall. He could feel it. The shift. The weight of truth pressing down through walls thick and inescapable. Mariana ended her address with a quiet fury that echoed long after she stepped away. "I may have walked out of that precinct, but too many don't. And starting today, we're going to change that." And just like that, the fight began. Not in the courtroom, not in private meetings, but in the streets, on the airwaves, and in every space where truth had once been silenced. The moment Chief Monica Jackson stepped back into Central Precinct, it was as though a storm entered the building. Her heels struck the floor with purpose, echoing down the sterile halls like thunder. Officers glanced up from their desks. Conversations halted mid-sentence, and even the most arrogant among them straightened in their chairs. Everyone knew she'd seen the footage. Everyone knew the headlines. And everyone knew the fire she was about to bring with her. Monica had spent the past 2 days at a state conference on public safety, shaking hands with legislators, delivering speeches on community trust. She had barely stepped off the plane when her phone blew up with messages. Her inbox flooded. Her department dragged across national media. Her prosecutor arrested in her own jurisdiction. The woman she had once mentored now thrust into the center of a civil rights inferno because one officer couldn't see past his own prejudice. And now Monica was back. Not as a figurehead, but as the reckoning Officer Nathan and everyone protecting him hadn't seen coming. She marched straight to the briefing room, her jaw tight, her eyes sharp as steel. Behind her trailed her deputy, face pale, lips drawn. Inside the room, Nathan was already seated, flanked by the same sergeant who had dismissed Mariana the night before, along with internal affairs officers attempting to look neutral. But they couldn't hide the discomfort in their posture. "Officer Nathan," Monica began, not bothering to sit. Her voice was calm, but the kind of calm that held back a storm. You had a black woman, parked in a state vehicle in a government lot. She identified herself, repeatedly, and you arrested her without verifying a single word she said. Am I correct so far? Nathan cleared his throat, trying to summon the same smug authority he'd used with Mariana. She didn't have ID, Chief. She was acting suspicious, leaning into the car, looking around. I followed protocol. Monica's eyes narrowed. Protocol? Or instinct? He faltered. Ma'am, You're not calling me ma'am like we're in uniform school, she snapped. You racially profiled a senior officer of the court. You ignored procedure. You escalated a peaceful situation because your bias told you who she was before you even asked. You didn't follow protocol, officer. You followed your prejudice. A beat of stunned silence filled the room. Monica turned to the deputy chief. And you allowed this to go unaddressed for nearly 24 hours. You let a prosecutor sit in a holding cell while your officers laughed about it. The deputy opened his mouth, then thought better of it. From this moment forward, Monica said, her voice steady, commanding, Officer Nathan is suspended without pay pending an immediate investigation. The footage will be released publicly, and this department will not hide behind silence or excuses any longer. Her gaze swept the room, sharp, unforgiving. If any of you think this is just about saving face, you're in the wrong job. This is about restoring the public's trust. And it starts by owning the damage you've done. As Monica turned and left the room, the building exhaled in stunned quiet. Officer Nathan sat frozen, his bravado finally stripped. The storm had arrived, and she had a badge, a voice, and the full weight of justice behind her. The more Mariana Caldwell and James Keller dug, the more the facade crumbled. What began as a single wrongful arrest had become the entry wound into something deeper, an infection beneath the badge, spreading quietly for years. After her public statement, Mariana had expected resistance. She'd braced herself for pushback, distraction, even slander. What she didn't expect was how quickly the cracks began to widen once pressure was applied in the right places. James had called in a favor with a clerk he'd once mentored, someone with access to internal complaint logs buried deep in the precinct's HR database. At first glance, the data looked clean. Too clean. But beneath the surface, patterns emerged like bruises beneath skin. Files marked informal, reports without incident numbers, and worse, allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, and unlawful detainment that never triggered a single disciplinary hearing. They found Officer Nathan's name first, of course. 3 prior complaints, 2 from young black men pulled over on suspicion of stolen vehicles, 1 from a Latina teacher mistaken for a shoplifter outside her school. Each case had been dismissed due to lack of evidence or insufficient cause for review. But that wasn't the damning part. The damning part was how those reports were filed. All 3 had been rerouted through the same internal review officer, Deputy Chief Raymond Ellison, the very man who had stood silently in the room with Chief Jackson, pretending he was caught off guard. This wasn't negligence, James muttered, flipping through the reports at Mariana's kitchen table late into the night. It's a deliberate system of suppression. These aren't isolated incidents, they're patterns, and Ellison's been the firewall. Mariana stared at the documents, rage simmering beneath the lawyer's calm in her veins. How many voices were buried to keep this department's image clean? She asked aloud, not expecting an answer. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, justice stirred, angry, patient, focused. They went public again the next morning, not with speeches, but with receipts. Mariana called a press conference and, with James beside her, detailed each buried complaint. She didn't use vague phrases. She said names, showed timestamps, spoke truth with surgical precision. This is not about one officer who made a bad call, she said into the microphone. This is about a department that made 100 decisions to look away. This is about Deputy Chief Ellison personally overseeing the suppression of misconduct reports involving racial bias. This is about every civilian complaint swept aside, every call for justice redirected into a locked drawer. The fallout was instantaneous. Protesters surged outside the precinct. A state inquiry was launched within 48 hours. Civil rights organizations demanded a federal investigation, and behind closed doors, Chief Monica Jackson ordered a full audit of every disciplinary review handled by Ellison over the past decade. Back at the precinct, Ellison's office was quiet. Too quiet. For a man who once controlled the narrative, he now sat in the middle of a storm of his own making, watching, as the lies he'd buried clawed their way into daylight. For Mariana, this was no longer about what happened to her. That had simply been the spark. This was about the years of silence that had come before, the lives upended, the voices ignored, and the system that allowed it to happen. And now, with every file unearthed and every truth spoken aloud, that system was starting to burn. The chamber was packed beyond capacity, rows of wooden seats overflowing with reporters, activists, city officials, and members of the public, many standing shoulder to shoulder along the back wall. Cameras lined the perimeter, lenses trained on the witness table like a jury of 1,000 eyes. At the center sat Mariana Caldwell, her posture unflinching, her presence commanding even in silence. The state seal loomed behind the city oversight committee, but it was Mariana who commanded the room. Her story had become a lightning rod, her arrest a spark that exposed the rot festering inside the very department she'd once stood beside. And now, before a live televised audience, she was about to turn that spark into a firestorm. Councilwoman Teresa Lang, head of the oversight panel, adjusted her microphone. "Miss Caldwell, thank you for appearing today. You may begin with your statement." Mariana leaned forward, voice steady, every word carved in stone. 2 weeks ago, I was wrongfully arrested outside my own courthouse by Officer Nathan. I identified myself clearly and calmly. I was ignored, cuffed, humiliated. I was denied a phone call, denied the basic courtesy of a name check, and detained without cause for hours. She paused, letting the words settle before continuing. I was not treated like a suspect. I was treated like a threat. And not because of what I did, but because of how I looked doing it. The room held its breath. "But this hearing is not about me," she continued. "This is about how many others came before me, who didn't have a press conference, who didn't have a title to shout over the cuffs. It's about the files we found, complaints buried by Deputy Chief Ellison, reports ignored, patterns hidden in plain sight. This system has been operating like a machine, with racial bias built into its wiring. What happened to me wasn't a failure, it was the design." A murmur rippled through the room. On the other side of the chamber, Deputy Chief Ellison sat stone-faced, flanked by counsel. His jaw tightened, his hands clasped, but his eyes betrayed the cracks, the fear of a man watching his empire unravel in real time. Mariana turned slightly toward the public gallery now, her voice rising, not in anger, but in undeniable truth. "I stand here today not because I'm the exception, but because I'm the proof. The proof that you can play by every rule, hold every title, and still be reduced to a stereotype in seconds. What hope does a teenager have on a street corner when a prosecutor in a courthouse parking lot isn't safe?" Councilwoman Lang blinked, struggling to maintain her composure. "Miss Caldwell, what would you like this committee to do?" Mariana didn't hesitate. "I want resignations. I want every buried complaint reinvestigated by an independent panel. I want an immediate suspension of internal case reviews until external oversight is in place, and I want systemic reforms written into law, not into a press release." The cameras caught it all, the fire in her eyes, the people rising to their feet behind her, and Ellison, visibly shrinking behind his silence. What began as one wrongful arrest had become a public reckoning, and Mariana Caldwell was no longer just a prosecutor or a victim, she was the face of a movement. And as the committee sat stunned, the weight of her words still hanging in the air, one truth became clear. This wasn't just testimony, it was history being made. The days following the public hearing were unlike anything the city had seen in decades. What had once been quiet outrage exploded into sustained public fury. Protesters flooded the streets not for a single march, but in organized waves. Outside the precinct, the mayor's office, the courthouse steps where Mariana had once stood silently and been mistaken for a criminal. Now, her voice echoed through bullhorns and city hall microphones alike. The people weren't just angry, they were awake, and the system that had once dismissed their stories as isolated incidents was now drowning beneath the weight of their collective truth. Within 72 hours, Deputy Chief Raymond Ellison was suspended pending a full federal investigation. His resignation letter, thinly veiled as early retirement, was leaked before the ink was dry. But the public wasn't fooled. The hearings had revealed a decade's worth of buried complaints, falsified internal reviews, and a quiet culture of retaliation for officers who dared to speak out. The department was no longer dealing with a public relations issue. It was confronting an institutional rot that could no longer be hidden under polished press releases and scripted apologies. Inside Central Precinct, silence reigned once more. But it was no longer complicit. It was nervous. Officer Nathan was formally terminated, the first of many. Body cam footage was reopened, redacted reports were pulled from archives, and civil rights attorneys filed a class action suit on behalf of victims long ignored. Mariana had personally requested oversight of the review board, not as a formality, but as a mission. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was demanding reform with teeth. And this time the system didn't have a back door to slip through. In a live press conference, Chief Monica Jackson stood beside Mariana, no longer just allies, but public partners, in dismantling a legacy of silence. "This department failed one of its own," Monica said, her voice firm but laced with quiet remorse. "But far worse, it failed the people it swore to protect. That ends today." Behind the scenes, new reforms were already being drafted. Mandatory racial bias training, independent civilian oversight, and a zero-tolerance policy for procedural negligence. Officers who had once laughed at Mariana's arrest now found themselves under scrutiny. The blue wall that had stood so high, so long, began to crack. Not through brute force, but through relentless exposure. And yet, Mariana knew this was only the beginning. In her quiet moments, she thought about the names in those forgotten reports, the ones who didn't go viral, the ones without podiums or press conferences. She thought about the teacher, the teenager, the father in a hoodie on the wrong corner at the wrong time. This victory wasn't hers alone. It was borrowed from every voice that had been silenced, every soul the system tried to erase. Standing in the newly formed Oversight Committee's office, she placed her hand on the first of many files marked for review. Her fingers hovered for a moment, then she opened it. This wasn't just about reckoning, it was about repair. And Mariana Caldwell was no longer just an advocate for justice. She was its architect. The city looked different now, not because its skyline had changed, but because its silence had been broken. What was once hidden behind thick stone walls and thickened layers of bureaucracy now lingered in the open air, exposed, raw, and undeniable. The courthouse where Mariana Caldwell had been arrested only weeks earlier stood behind her like a monument to contradiction, a place built for justice that had once tried to deny it to her. But now, as she stood on the courthouse steps, briefcase in hand and press cameras flashing from across the plaza, it no longer felt like a place of loss. It felt like a battleground reclaimed. Inside her office, a space that had once felt insulated, clinical, removed from the human cost of injustice, new energy pulsed. The Oversight Committee met there twice a week now. Civilian voices, activists, educators, victims, and survivors gathered around her table. They didn't speak in hypotheticals. They spoke in truths. Some shook as they spoke. Some cried. Some raged. Mariana listened to every word, not just because she could, but because she had promised she would. The reforms had started, files reopened, cases re-examined, policies rewritten. But Mariana knew better than to believe that laws alone would fix a system that had been broken by culture, not just procedure. True change wasn't written in ink. It was enforced in action. And the resistance was already forming. Officers who thought her reforms went too far. Leaders who believed the spotlight would fade. Elected officials who offered applause in public and roadblocks in private. The system didn't yield easily. Not to reason, not to outrage, and certainly not to truth. But Mariana didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. The fire that had been sparked in that parking lot had become something else entirely. Not just a personal crusade, not just a headline, but a movement that refused to be contained. Late one evening, long after the halls of power had emptied, Mariana stood alone in the precinct where it had all started. The front desk sergeant nodded as she entered, this time with respect. She passed the holding cell she had once sat in, hands cuffed, voice ignored, dignity frayed. She stopped briefly, just long enough to let the memory pass through her, then moved on. It was a reminder, not of pain, but of purpose. Of the fight that wasn't over, would never be over. Not until every voice that had been dismissed was heard. She returned to her office where the walls were no longer bare. A framed photo of the public hearing hung beside one of her mother, an activist who had once marched in the streets Mariana now spoke in. Below it was a handwritten letter from a high school student who had watched her testimony on television. "Now I want to be someone who changes things too." Mariana smiled as she read it again. Not because the battle was won, but because the fire had spread. She sat at her desk and opened a new file, another complaint once buried, now demanding justice. The system had underestimated her, tried to reduce her to a mugshot. But she had rebuilt herself from the pieces they tried to scatter, and now she was stronger than the storm they thought would destroy her. This was more than repair. This was revolution. And Mariana Caldwell had no plans to stop. Not now, not ever. Not until justice looked like everyone. In today's world, Mariana Caldwell's story is more than fiction. It's a reflection of reality. Every day, people of color face judgment not for what they do, but for how they look. From traffic stops to job interviews, assumptions and biases shape outcomes long before facts are ever considered. Mariana's wrongful arrest, despite her position of power, reminds us that no title, education, or success can shield someone from systemic prejudice. The lesson is clear. We must challenge systems that normalize racial profiling and silence truth, not just when it happens to someone powerful, but especially when it happens to those without a voice. Real justice requires more than apologies. It demands accountability, reform, and the courage to speak up even when it's uncomfortable. Listen, believe, act. Because ignoring injustice today only ensures it continues tomorrow. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and comment, one if you found the story meaningful. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.